start with a little bit of housekeeping. So we ask that you please mute all your microphones if you're not speaking. And if you have a question, you can leave it in the Q&A box at the bottom of the screen, or you can raise your hand and unmute your microphone to ask questions. This talk is being recorded and it will be made available on the DHS YouTube channel. And next, I want to, every program we start with a land acknowledgement. And this land acknowledgement is thanks to Chief Dennis Coker. We begin by acknowledging with respect. We gather today in Lenape-Hawking, traditional homeland of the Lenape people for tens of thousands of years. Sometimes translated original people, the Lenape were known as mediators and called the grandfathers by the entire Algonquin family tree of languages, encompassing the Delaware River Basin. Lenape-Hawking includes present-day New Jersey, most of Delaware, and eastern parts of New York and Pennsylvania, and was home to 2,000 Lenape in 3 clans: the Wolf Clan in the mountains speaking Munsee dialect, the Turtle Clan along the rivers speaking Unami, and the Turkey Clan by the Big Water speaking Unalachtigo. Within the first 100 years of foreign contact, 80% of the Lenape had already died from violent conflict and disease, in spite of the famous peace treaty between William Penn and the Lenape chief Tamimend at Shaxamund. European forced the Lenape westward and northward to Oklahoma, Wisconsin, and Ontario, where many of the descendants live today. Named after, but some of the Lenape never left, hiding in plain sight as keepers of the land. The Lenape Indian tribe of the basin of Delaware Basin in Cheswold, Delaware, the Nanacoke, the Lenape, the Lenni Lenape tribal nation in Bridgeton, New Jersey, and Rapamung the Lenape Nation in Mahwah, New Jersey, are the 3 of the thriving Lenape communities today. Let us acknowledge the historical and ongoing presence of the Lenape and the Nanticoke on this land where we now live, work, and celebrate all of our relations. So I want to now introduce our moderator for this wonderful program. Our moderator is Sarah Lester. So Sarah Lester is the president and CEO of Cornerstone Westside CDC. In this role, Sarah is responsible for overseeing Cornerstone's affordable housing and community economic development programs, including Westside Grows Together. Sarah has cross-sector experience growing businesses and coordinating networks, events, and resources to strengthen communities. Native Delawarean, Sarah spent several years in Rhode Island working as an AmeriCorps Vista for Ashoka Youth Venture and for a food hub where she managed all the aspects of the farmers market program. Sarah returned to the Mid-Atlantic region to pursue her Master's of Public Administration at the University of Pennsylvania, and now loves living, working, and biking in the west side of Wilmington. Sarah has a BA in International Relations from Brown University. So happy to have you, Sarah.
Yeah, thanks, Gopi. Yeah, that's awesome. So I'm so happy to be here. Thanks, everyone, for joining us this evening. I have the extreme privilege of moderating the panel for tonight's discussion about 95 and its lasting impacts in the community. And just a tiny bit more about me, and then I promise you won't hear too much more from me tonight. I am currently a resident on 7th Street in Wilmington, 2 blocks from 95. And I've had the opportunity, as Kobe mentioned, to work with Westside Grows Together for the past 5 years, working to improve the quality of life in Wilmington's West Side. So I-95 is one of the borders of our focus areas of the West Side, and became a pretty, big topic as the construction, as the construction became a hot topic in Wilmington over the past few years, as everyone is familiar with the construction on 95. At that time, as that topic was percolating up, I worked with several community leaders to convene and formulate a vision for 95, both short, medium, and long term, not just to the physical highway, which was receiving improvements, but for the adjacent communities and the spaces over and under the highway. So this effort also merged with a new group of residents that was convening on both sides of 95 called United Neighbors. And we held several events on the bridges across 95 to celebrate and reconnect communities through art, murals, food, and gatherings on the bridge. So I'm relatively new to the city, and I've learned so much from these panelists and many others, even on the audience, about the impacts of 95. And tonight we are here for a conversation, hopefully very informal conversation amongst good friends, around how the construction and even just the existence of 95 still affects the city and our communities, and to explore visions for the future of this important gateway into and through our city. So please feel free, audience members, to ask questions in the chat. We will be monitoring that. And as Kobe mentioned, I guess there is a function for raising your hand so that there may be, I saw a question already, you may be able to ask that question at the end. We will reserve a good amount of time for questions and answers. We just have a few prompts for the panelists tonight. So with that out of the way, I am going to turn it over to our panelists to introduce themselves, and I'll call on you. But if you could just share your name, any affiliations you'd like to provide, and then as just a basic prompt, if you could share what is one of your first memories of I-95 or most impactful. So just to get us going. So I will start I'll go in a circle on my screen, and I'll start with former Mayor Jim Baker.
Oh, good evening. It's nice to be here, and certainly to see all the panelists, because you've got a good panel here. When I first came to Wilmington, that's I-95 was still being built. So they were still blasting and all of that to build 95 through the city of Wilmington. I've been involved in community organization for a long time, city council for a while, city council president and mayor. So I've had a lot of experience with what has happened to Wilmington over the years, and certainly the impact of I-95.
Thank you. Next, we'll go to India.
Hello, good evening, everybody. Thank you so much for chiming in, and thank you so much for having me here as part of this panel. My name is India Colon-Diaz. I am the Vice President of Notre, a cultural organizational group that hosts the annual cultural events for Hispanic Heritage Month, the festivals, parade, and just a whirlwind of great cultural connections that we do in the community and things that focus on the arts. We work very closely with a lot of advocacy and really just serving as an organization that serves as a Hispanic liaison to community members or individuals that don't know how to advocate for them for just their rights. And we just kind of take it up the chain to the local government, state government, and we just continue to go up and especially try to continue to incorporate the arts. I think the earliest memory I have is two of them are very distinct. It is where I met my recruiter when I joined the military right on the corner of 4th and Jackson Street, because he came to this church, St. Paul's, and they were in a big influx of recruiting. I remember meeting that person in the corner because in order for me to get in, they had to meet my parents. So my parents were my father still is the director and the choir director of the St. Paul's Church and has been for over 30 years now. So if you ever go into Sunday Mass on Sunday, that is the voice you hear singing with the church community there. And when their windows are open. So that's probably my teenage. The earliest one has to probably be and would be coming down 4th Street when I would cross the street on 4th Street. I grew up right on 3rd and Harrison. And then we moved, and I thought it was the biggest move in the world. We went from 3rd and Harrison to 3rd to right onto 3rd Street, in between Harrison and 2nd Street. And I thought that was like the greatest thing in the world, but everything was right there. There was visibility to 95. I've been a parishioner of St. Paul's Church my entire life. I'm a Wilmington native. So St. Paul's Church that's right there, right off of Jackson Street, where it's been greatly impacted and definitely is a hub for that resource community there. So that's probably my earliest memory. Is 4 years old. I attended St. Paul's School right off of that 95 corridor of the church. So yeah, it's near and dear to my heart.
Excellent. Next, I actually was going to even maybe share my screen because there's this amazing picture from part one of St. Paul's Church right near where the construction was. And let's see if I can navigate technology, you all, to keep this really exciting. But is this the picture? I think this is a picture of where the highway was. Am I right, Dr. David?
Beautiful.
Do you know?
That is St. Paul's.
Yeah. So anyway, just trying to add some images as we discuss certain pieces, but St. Paul's obviously, as you mentioned, very impacted by 95. So next up, if we could hear from introduction from Senator Lockman.
Thanks, Sarah. Good evening, everybody. I'm Tizzie Lockman, and I am serving as the state senator for Delaware's 3rd state senatorial district. It is oftentimes referred to as West Wilmington, but it actually it's downtown the riverfront and surrounding neighborhoods. So it actually picks up a lot of the east side and West Center City, east of 95. It's essentially bisected by I-95, which has been certainly interesting in these times. And for me, I grew up in the Cool Spring neighborhood, which is probably the closest there to the border on the west side of the highway. As I learned from the first panel, that was the area that was intended to remain residential, right? And that was new information to me. So grew up on 9th and Franklin, just a few blocks from the highway. So I can't really say I have an earliest memory of it. It was just always there. But the most impactful memory that I think I have of I-95 was, I continued to live in that family home until just a couple of months ago. And when my daughter, who's now 18, was very small, I didn't drive a car and was navigating the world with my toddler. And so I would walk back and forth across 95 constantly, many times a day, to take her to the Central Y for preschool. Certainly made that trip by bike and foot, other times for work and things like that. So for me, it's really just that memory of crossing those very heavily trafficked roads to get to the bridge, and then walking across the bridge and looking at the highway below. And it's just really a constant through many phases of my life. So thank you.
And those bridges are quite dark at night, which is maybe something we will touch on later. But next up, we have State Representative Sherry Dorsey Walker.
Thank you, Sarah. It's a privilege to be with all of these great people on this panel this evening. I have the distinct honor of being able to call Mayor Baker a constituent and a mentor. You already mentioned that I represent the west side of Wilmington, the 3rd district, and I am a little biased. I do believe that the west side is indeed the best side, and that's just the way that it is, right, India? She raising the roof. Sarah, we welcome you to the West Side. We're so grateful for your leadership with West Side Grows Together. My first memory of 95 is my aunt moved to the city of Wilmington, my aunt and uncle, and they moved to Green Acres when I was a little girl. And we would drive up Clayton Street, turn right on 9th Street, and then make the left on Adams Street to get on 95 to go to her house to get off Marsh Road. And then when we come back, after, I would take a bag because I would figure out a way to spend the night at her house because she had a trampoline in the basement. And coming back, getting on 95 from Marsh Road and getting off at 4th and Jackson and seeing St. Paul. And when we would get off at 4th and Jackson, I knew I was back home on the west side. And St. Paul was always my welcome. And it was always my safe haven coming off of 95. Now I attended St. Elizabeth's all 12 years, but 95 was always synonymous with St. Paul for me growing up.
Great, thank you. And last but not least, we have Dr. Nina David.
Hi, everyone. My name is Nina David. I am an associate professor in the Biden School of Public Policy and Administration at the University of Delaware. I'm an architect and urban planner by training, so I think a lot about the sort of environment around me, built or natural. I do a lot of research on governmental policy and how that ends up impacting the built environment. So there's definitely professional curiosity that wants me to be part of the discussions around the 95, but there are personal reasons as well. My first interaction with the city of Wilmington was in 2012. My spouse and I had made a trip here to attempt to buy a house before our pending move to the state of Delaware, all the way from Michigan. And we had a limited 2-day period to look for houses. It was frantic, and we were going from one neighborhood to another. And we had all these house contenders, right, in Quaker Hill and Trinity vicinity and the Triangle and Trolley Square. And we ended up buying a home in Cool Spring, Tilton Park, 2 doors down from Senator Lockman. So I have firsthand sort of experience with that neighborhood, right? Cool Spring, Tilton Park, where if you live there, it's hard to not notice the impact of 95 as a barrier, if you will, visual, physical, psychological on your everyday existence. But even during my first trip in 2012, the thing that was very apparent to me was that Wilmington was really a city of many neighborhoods. And each of the neighborhoods were fundamentally maybe different and unique from each other. They had their identity and culture and history and architecture and flair. And the 95 to me stands in sharp contrast, right, to that place identity that you have with all of the city neighborhoods. It's gray and it's monotonous. And the first question you ask is why, right? Why is this here? It's such a contrasting structure. That's just a space. It could belong anywhere, like the term that James Howard Kunstler used, the geography of nowhere. But why is it here, right? And that was my first reaction in 2012. I still have that reaction today.
Thank you so much. I am realizing that we have a lot of representation from the west side of 95 on this panel, and so I'll be looking to Senator Lockman and former Mayor Baker and Sherry and State Representative Dorsey Walker to represent, West Center City as well, and of course many of the other neighborhoods that you all serve. So, for those of you attending and panelists, if you have not had the opportunity to watch part 1, leave this panel right now and go watch it. Just kidding, wait till later, but it's phenomenal. It's really the amount of images and information, maps. I love the maps that Dr. David and her students Sam and Josh present are just really informative and a great basis for this conversation. So I do have a couple of snapshots from that presentation to kind of set the stage a bit for folks that may have missed it, but I am going to turn to Dr. David first to kind of give maybe a brief overview of a couple of the points from that presentation if you'd like. But my first question is, let's just make sure I ask it correctly since I have my notes here. My first question is, what has been one of the biggest impacts, lasting impacts of the construction of I-95 from your perspective? So just to put up an image while you start, unless you wanted to share any, Dr. David, but I was just going to put up kind of just a few, but you can start whenever.
Yeah, so thank you for that question. And so I think of cities as sort of complex systems where there are all these little parts and all of the parts are interconnected to each other. So the way I see it, the biggest impact of the 95, particularly from doing the research, is not any one thing. It's the sort of cumulative impact on many of those parts that make up the city. So for example, it's not just that 926 families were displaced. It's also that about 652 buildings were torn down. And it's not just that 652 buildings were torn down, it's that the majority of them were residential structures. It's not just that they were residential structures, the majority of them were owner occupied at that time. And it's not just that it was residential structures, we had commercial structures, all the little corner stores that we like these days that give sort of the livability and vibrance to our communities, the third places that you remember going to get an ice cream cone as a child. So there were 50 of those commercial structures that were torn down. And it's not just that people were displaced and buildings were torn down and those buildings meant something to the people that lived there. It's also that all of this was right in the middle of the city, right? And in putting the 95 where it ended up eventually being, you sort of have a barrier, right? Right in the middle of the city where there should have been none. It disrupts the grid, street pattern of the city that's great for connectivity. So you see a loss of connectivity come from it. It's a visual barrier. So what you see is border vacuums around it, a lot of, dead spaces around it where those dead spaces shouldn't have existed. So it's sort of the combined impact, the visual impact, the sort of physical impact, the impact on people, the impact on the sort of economics of the area, impact on commerce, all of that together is what makes it so devastating to me, the impact of the 95 itself.
Yeah, and so at this point, if folks want to kind of gesture to me, and I can, but if anyone else either has a response to Professor David or, wants to add kind of what have been some of the biggest lasting impacts of the construction, I can.
Well, actually, 95 was one of the major destructions of Wilmington as a major city because it prohibited so much in terms of division between people. There were people after I-95 was built, they would not cross I-95 and go to West Center City because they were afraid of it. And by taking people away from one another and casting them to the wind, literally, you helped destroy the city's vibrance and its importance. And 95, urban renewal, the riots of 68, and the suburban development and mall development were the major impacting destructive forces upon the city as a place for people to live and to enjoy. It became a reservation for poor people, actually.
Senator Lockman.
Yeah, I think just as a response, I was really amazed. And again, I watched the prior panel to learn that the nature of the destruction was more complex than I really realized. I think it's still largely true, but my impression of it was always that it had felt almost like an intentional gutting of, a beleaguered part of the city, which I think was quite true. But there were also things there that were more vibrant, like churches. There was that brewery that was talked about. Who knew? We regret missing that now. It's very of the moment. The movie theater, and even a neighborhood that was not a poor neighborhood that sort of became a casualty of what happened. Was really fascinating that was destroyed and sort of what that means. It sort of adds some layers of consideration for me as to just why we were so determined to sort of like drive this wedge through our city. So that's just one of the thoughts that comes up immediately, but just that there was so much loss. I think that folks don't realize. I think we think, oh, it was a slum clearance and that's bad, but it's sort of a very one-dimensional look at what happened. It was a multifaceted destruction, and I think the impact has been multifaceted on a range of neighborhoods and experiences of Wilmington as well.
Can I add a quick thought to what Senator Lockman just said? And in those days, we were very quick to deem certain areas as blighted without really paying attention to sort of what life in the community was like. And a single small thing like having older buildings that were just more than 50 years old, say buildings built before 1900 would qualify your neighborhood for meeting one of the blight considerations and to go on a map, right, as a blighted neighborhood, just the age of the building and the structure. Today, we look at those structures and say, maybe they're historic structures and there's value in preserving them, right? But we weren't necessarily thinking about things that way, intentional or not.
Right. And you got to remember when they tore down all of those houses on the west side, urban renewal later on came on and destroyed all of those houses and businesses on the east side, which was called Project A. They destroyed the whole neighborhood and it was nothing but vacant land. And so you got all this shifting going on and people trying to find out where to live and where would they go, because if you owned a home, even though they paid you for buying your home before you had to move, where do you move to and feel that you're part of something? So you had all that shifting going on. And then here comes suburban development, mall development, and people moving with their pocketbooks to live a better life. You understand that. So then when the riots came, then it was fear that caused people to move, and it just, the urban renewal policies of buying up the houses in West Center City and then rehabbing them. And then the federal government cut the money and they couldn't rehab the houses, so they just stood vacant. It was just terrible public policy that really hurt the city and other cities across. And they always told me that engineers like to go in a straight line. So that's probably why they did. Other than the political, I think I-95 was passed by one vote in city council.
Yeah, and not to get too far into the history from part one, but there was a debate over, I see a question in the question and answer about the debate of the location, and that is what Jim Baker is referencing as far as the vote and the selection of the location that we know it as now. It was definitely going to be, there were other options. One along, the major option was along Bancroft Parkway, correct, Professor David? And I want to hear, India, did you unmute yourself? Did you want to say something? Is that why, or are you good? Okay, for right now. And then I'll show one picture just to give a visual for folks who are attending from the first talk, and then State Representative Dorsey Walker, please jump in.
Thank you, Sarah. It's pretty interesting listening to Dr. David and listening to Mayor Baker, because when I listen to my parents and getting the oral history of our city, it's very disconcerting knowing that this was an intentional move by those in power, and listening to and learning about the history of our city and state. There was one legislator on city council who voted no, and that was Gerald Brady, Representative Gerald Brady's father at that time. He did not believe that 95 should be running through the west side of Wilmington. And he had a point there, because as Mayor Baker mentioned, West Center City became, to some degree, a bit of a pariah, which it is not and should never have been. Then Hilltop has always been a thriving community. And it was unfortunate because even as a child, when we would do activities, you could do activities in Hilltop, but the minute you cross 95, that became a problem. I'm talking about just from my own childhood. And we could go to West Center City, or now Hicks-Anderson Community Center. Well, that's another issue. We had so many community centers when we were growing up. We had Weston, we had Hicks-Anderson, we had the Marsh Youth Center on 4th Street, and we were and the community kind of policed itself too. And for this to happen, it's almost like it was intentional to divide people who had come together to make a difference in their city. My parents talked to me about how Wilmington was thriving and how this was a great place to raise your children. It was a great place, and it still is, in my opinion. But there's so many. I don't remember growing up with helicopters at night, having to hear helicopters. And Senator Lockman and I have talked about this. We hear helicopters when a child gets shot and when a cop gets shot. And these are the lasting effects of running 95 right through thriving communities. We don't think about it 20, 30, 50 years later. We just think the here and now. But as a policy, I'm always thinking, how is this, what are the unintended consequences of this piece of legislation that I may want to pass? And that's why it's so important to have people from all walks of life at the table when we're working on legislation, so that we get different opinions, so that we don't make these kinds of mistakes. 50, 60 years later, we have crime-ridden communities that should not be, some crime-ridden communities that should not be, because it's like, well, that's a dumping ground. I'm not saying this is how I feel about it. I'm talking about this is the collective thought about certain communities, and it's unfair because when a community gets deemed that way, and Mayor Baker can talk to you about it, from having been mayor and been a city councilman for 20 years, I almost said 60 years, but Mayor Baker, you were there for a long time. But my point in saying all that is just learning the history of this city and how much we lost as a result of 95, and being able to revive the idea set forth by Mayor Baker to potentially put a cap on 95, to reconnect communities that were disconnected. That's where we are right now. So prayerfully, we'll be able to carry on Mayor Baker's legacy in this moment, we collectively, members of the West Side, to put this cap on 95 and create the first urban national park in the nation.
And before we jump into the kind of future, which is a great segue, we'll hold on to that thought. I just wanted to touch base with India about St. Paul's real quick. So I am just curious, and you may not, just as much as you're able to share, or if anyone else wants to jump in, but St. Paul's obviously was right there and has lasted through the construction of 95. Can you speak a little bit to kind of what happened, I guess, at the time, or the transformation over the years, or if you can?
So St. Paul's was a very heavy Polish community, and it's actually in its 150-year anniversary right now. So it's a really big deal to see this next transition for it. So the community there is very much, it is a very historical site, and it has transitioned through so many of the divides in the community because it's been there for so long, and it is not deemed a historical building, but it has been there for 150 years. And it doesn't take much but to walk through it to see that history inside of it. And it has seen so much cultural change within its members over the years. Sadly, St. Paul's Church wasn't just a church. It had a school there as well, which many people weren't familiar with. But the school, St. Paul's School, was actually part of that transition. I want to say it was because my daughter attended the school. I graduated from the school. My daughter went to the school, but they shut the school down when she was in 4th or 5th grade. And it's continued to impact. So even though it has affected the church and the way the migration of individuals in the community have changed, you see a very dominant Hispanic community, which wasn't so much then 100 years ago or 50 years ago, but it is a very heavy Hispanic community there now that is predominant in that church right now. But one of the biggest impacts that I think I've seen was in the last 50 years is how it's been impacted with the growth of students and the change in students and how the schools change. But not only that corner right there where St. Paul's is, but the natural divide that has re-sectored school and zoning for students. And that has probably impacted that community significantly because schools that are private in the community, churches or daycare centers or anything like that, have really had to work harder to find how that connection is going to happen. Businesses have been affected, businesses as well as churches shutting down because it's forced individuals over the years to reconsider because of the way it's changed the DNA of or like Dr. David said, like the fabric of the neighborhoods. It's changed so much, and 95 has really impacted it in a way that people have almost left because of what its impact has done in the neighborhoods. Like Senator Dorsey Walker was saying, some of the violence, some of like the labels, the rezoning of the schools. And now, and you see it when you're out there with the youth or in the church groups and the youth groups in the churches, they're like, it's us against you guys. Well, you guys happens to be the kids on the other side of 95. And it's so interesting to say, it's like us against them, this community center against them. So I really do think that, you know, St. Paul's was impacted. You saw the fabric of what that culture looked like from the Polish community and just the Irish community, the Italian community, and now it's very heavy in the Hispanic community. It has significantly changed. And I think it's still impacting the fact that it's right there every Sunday. You hear 95, all I hear is music and 95 traffic because they open the windows up and that's all you hear. And And since it's such a beautiful historical site, it's an unfortunate thing. So I do hope that they see these historical places that are meeting locations for individuals as an opportunity for this cat, like Senator was saying, to really do some impact, to really connect and see how we can correct some of those things.
And thinking about the spaces under the highway, right, which is what exactly St. Paul's space is, which I know you've talked a lot about with, out India over the years. And so one thing I wanted to just touch on too, as we've heard from a couple of the panelists, the construction of 95, one of the things I learned from part one from Professor David was just how much the construction valued cars over people. And they do a lot of like quantifying what that actually was and how it, the kind of reason why it was built and kind of getting traffic flow through and to Wilmington from the suburbs, which as the car proliferation of the car and garages was, at the time increasing. And so one thing I just want to ask, and I guess I get to do that as a panelist, is just, were there any positive, impacts of the construction of 95? I just, from anyone's perspective, I just want to touch that before we move into kind of future planning.
Well, obviously, some people made a lot of money off of I-95 going through there. And there were people, that it benefited in that sense. But overall, it didn't benefit anybody. Why do you have I-495? It's because that's originally where some people thought that 95 should have gone around the city so that you could come in on spurs. By the way, my son attended St. Paul's School. Probably when India was going there, he was probably in the same time frame anyways, but it was a great school. And I was sad, even though we tried to raise money to keep it open, but it's amazing how transformation economically affects everybody. Look how many places have shut down or closed down or whatever over the years that we thought was so great, and then boom, it's gone. And it affects the psyche of people that their neighborhoods disrupt so much. And people leave because they don't feel comfortable anymore being there. Now, I live in the Cool Springs area. It's a very nice area. Thank you, Senator and Rep. But anyway, it's a very nice neighborhood. You know the people, they know you. So there is connection, like you do feel like you're in a community and not just living there.
Yeah, I was going to comment. The only thing I can think positive from my own experience is when I'm coming from the south on 95 and sort of the vista I get of Wilmington coming in and the trees on the west side always makes me happy. Other than that, can't think of anything. My mother and father met and married in Wilmington in the 60s. And so my mom was a freshman at Goldie Beacom College, which was in the city of Wilmington in 1963. And she used to talk all the time about how amazing and vibrant the downtown was. And she was a country girl, and this was like what she was here for. And so it's sort of amazing to me to think about how quickly I think that was lost. Obviously, it was still there at that time when the highway was, already completed. But, the promise that it was going to encourage people to come into Wilmington, obviously the opposite has happened. We have people out in the county who will say, I would never go into Wilmington. So that hasn't happened. There's the dynamic, I think, that we talk about, at least anecdotally, I don't have the data, but it's sort of become more of a corridor for, trafficking of illegal substances or things like that. It makes us a hot spot for people to make exchanges on the Eastern Seaboard. It just seems a lot easier to access the negative consequences, sorry, Sarah, than to think of anything that it's really facilitated that's been positive for us. And that's painful. It's just painful to think about and now to look at, now that we're sort of reckoning with that.
Shameless plug for United Neighbors, but also just a picture of the kind of view from one of the bridges across 95. Just thought I would share that. But we are going to shift gears to a new question in a moment. But are there any other responses just to this particular kind of topic? Or
No, but what the senator said about the drugs, when I was mayor and met with the DEA and the FBI and all of that, they always said if I-95 or Wilmington was 5 miles westward away from I-95, you would not have a drug problem. So 95 is just the corridor of drugs for our city.
So quick, just to kind of to weave in some of the questions from the audience as we're going, just real quick before, like I said, we shift gears. Anyone could answer this, but just to get a concrete response to why. So Gretchen mentioned, I attended a webinar on the current Restore the Corridor 95 renovation, and they said 95 could have been built where 495 was built. Why was that not done? So is there kind of a short answer to that from
political, pure and simple. It's a political decision.
So the political decision. So that's the answer to that question. and then I think you touched on this earlier, Jim. But was there a relationship between the development of I-95 and the urban renewal that leveled about 8 blocks east of Market Street? Most of the structures were brick and 18th and 19th century. So you did mention that earlier. Were they connected?
No, they weren't connected. They were separate. You know, who knows if they weren't from the federal level, it could have been looked upon that way, because I-95, if you look at when it was constructed and then you look at the east side when it was destructed, it's almost, you know, one after the other. But as far as my knowledge is on the two, is that they were separate.
Yeah, although Dr. David, didn't one of your students say, you know, that to some extent the path that the 95 took was seen as sort of killing two birds with one stone, sort of slum clearance and getting the highway?
Yeah, in fact, that was one of the justifications for the 95 going on the Adams-Jackson corridor as opposed to Bancroft, because they had two different maps showing that the Adams-Jackson corridor had more blighted structures and the Bancroft route did not have blighted structures, and therefore why not use the 95 to clear out blighted structures? You sort of see that across the country, where officials would get federal dollars to clear areas, deeming them slums, and then they'd get transportation dollars to build a highway through the areas that they cleared using urban renewal money. It's not clear that that happened here. Here it was two different things, but there are some connections in terms of thought process with regard to how we thought about areas as blighted or not.
Gotcha. Well, thank you for that information. I am now going to turn it to State Representative Dorsey Walker, because she mentioned something that's on a lot of folks' minds, which is the concept of a potential cap or land bridge. There's different terms that have been used actually across the country, because it is a topic that over the many years has been a hot topic across the country with highways that have divided many communities. So the next question for the group, but I will start with State Representative Dorsey Walker, is what is an improvement, big or small, you think is imperative for reconnecting or healing communities across and under the highway? And I'm sure we're going to get through many rounds of, I think, this response, but you can start wherever you'd like, State Rep.
A great question. It's interesting because the shirt that I'm wearing right now is the Team Warehouse, and they had the grand opening today, and that's where I was coming. And the reason why I mention that is there's talk of doing team warehouses all throughout the city of Wilmington, and that's part of the healing. Now, when we talk about 95, how can we heal our community through 95? Through a lot of the work that you are doing, Sarah, and kudos to you and Westside Grows Together and to the community for the work that's being done on the bridges, the mural projects. It's bringing the West Center City community and the Hilltop community together. And that is what is needed in this moment. It's the same thing with like the Browntown and Hedgeville communities. They're so very similar, yet they were divided for some time. And the divide was Maryland Avenue. But in this moment, when we're talking about healing the community, it would be a blessing to be able to get that cap on 95 and have a walkable community, be able to have a biking trail, be able to have an amphitheater, and to help correct a lot of the wrongs that happened with 95. Dr. David mentioned it a little earlier. And and Mayor Baker talked about, as well as Senator Lockman, the drug activity. I do not believe we have the problems that we have with drugs right now. I've had conversations with FBI agents that are like, this 95, it created such a haven for through the Bosch Wash corridor, the Boston, Washington corridor. Easy on, easy off. So we can look at healing the city through that cap.
And what State Rep, could you expand a little bit about kind of the concept of the cap, kind of like what that might look like? Yeah.
Surely. So there are several projects all throughout the country where this has happened. It's happened in Dallas, it's happened in Boston, the Big Dig. Now, we don't actually have to do what some of the other cities have done. We can theoretically build the infrastructure is already there on 95. We can literally put this, what we were calling a cap. It would be like an umbrella, so to speak. And I know some people are like, well, it wouldn't be safe. Wouldn't people be throwing things over the side of 95? The answer to that question is no, because we would have the necessary barriers in place so that that would not happen. What our desire is to create green space, to create those walkable communities that exist in Senator Lockman and I and our part of our district, which is Union Park Gardens or Bancroft Parkway. Everyone should have access to the kind of communities that exist in Bayard Square, Bancroft Parkway, Union Park Gardens, the Highlands, all these great communities on the west side of Wilmington and Rockford Park. But why can't West Center City and Hilltop have the same kind of access? And we have to, and Cool Spring Tilton Park does have that kind of community because the people in the neighborhoods, socioeconomically, it's a little different. But what a great thing to be able to bring Cool Spring, Tilton Park, Hilltop, and West Center City together in one place. And then we break down the barriers that currently exist with they're on that side of 95. It's even funny with trash collection. Yeah. West Center City's trash is collected at the same time as the east side of Wilmington. And I found that out because Senator Lockman and I were at a civic association meeting in West Center City, and the constituents were like, well, you have to put your trash out tonight because I was like, what? You guys are picking up the trash on the same time that you pick up the trash on the east side. So West Center City is actually encompassed on the east side, even with trash and recycling collection. So right. Those are things that need to change so that we can shift the conversation and the culture.
And there are varying degrees, I think, of, the cost of a cap, there's all sorts of, there's a feasibility study actually that's going to be underway conducted through WillMapGo. But I just wanted to show a picture of a rendering of the cap in Philadelphia. And I'm terrible with geography up there because I just spend so much time in Wilmington, but this is on the, let me get my east side. Yep. Or east, closer to the river on the east side of Philadelphia. So you can see kind of just an image of, and this is going to cost millions and millions of dollars, but it is underway as far as construction, but just to kind of see, you can see the highway running underneath, and this is just one example of a cap.
Sarah, what I think is interesting is that in part one of this whole segment, in listening through it, I remember when Dr. David, I think it was Jacob, when he was in part one, they were actually explaining that one of the justifications and the attractiveness of the actual getting to, the approval, and one of the justifications was to build all these beautiful playgrounds along like the corridor of 95 and make sure that, all the landscaping along 95 was great. And if you look at it today, it's the exact opposite. There's no beautiful landscaping along any of this 95 corridor that's smack right in the middle of the community. There are no playgrounds. In fact, I think going through right underneath 95, there was basketball courts right off of 3rd and Jackson Street. And I think one of the things that affected me most recently, probably just a few weeks ago, the most was seeing that the actual 95 corridor was there with the basketball courts, and now there are cages or fences, but I consider them cages around the basketball courts where the kids are playing in the inner city. And I was like, this is not anywhere near the attractiveness. I'm like, when did we start playing in cages in Wilmington? And it was really overwhelming to see that. So when I was looking at part one and thinking of the cap, like the representative was saying, the senator and Mayor Baker, it really is an opportunity, a beautiful cap to pretty much just kind of it's already there. We can't remove 95, but what we could do is kind of hold it accountable to what was supposed to happen at this point, which is green and all those beautiful, like multi-dimensional spaces that are going to reconnect them, because the cage underneath the 90 really hurt me to see those kids in there. I was just like, get them out.
I'm gonna go to Senator Lockman, but we will answer a question about removing 95 in a little bit.
Yeah.
But those two pictures that I just showed, I just want to make sure folks know what I'm doing. Like, I'm not just showing random pictures, but they're exactly what India was referencing from part one. They are images from renderings at the time, around the time of the construction, for some of the greenery that was proposed.
Yeah.
Wrong picture, that one and this one. So you can see kind of how not the same thing as a cap, but definitely more open space and green space around the highway. So Senator Lockman.
Yeah, no, I think that is a great catch, India. And then also it's fascinating to hear you characterize the new structures there as cages, because I actually was there. I'm going to do a shout out because I see them in the crowd. We have this unfair advantage of seeing all the attendees, but Secretary of the Delaware Department of Transportation, Nicole Majeski, is here, and the Deputy Shante Hastings. So I wanted to give them a shout out and everything they've done to support the feasibility study being done. But Secretary Majeski was actually with me doing a cleanup under 95 in that area, and we were doing a lot around the basketball courts in particular. And yeah, now I'm thinking back, I'm like, yeah, it did feel like cages, and trapped a lot of garbage as well, which is exactly what we were there to do. And now I've forgotten what I was going to comment on it. But got the concept of the cap, and I kind of wanted to harken back to something that Representative Dorsey Walker mentioned earlier. I think really more to do with the process that formed what we've been living with for 50 years. And to me, learning particularly from the last presentation, how instructive that is for us as policymakers or folks with influence on that process to be thinking about where they went wrong in terms of not avoiding unintended consequences, and maybe being hard-headed about this idea that they have the right answer for what to do for the city, and thinking more about suburbanites with cars versus, the way that people were actually living in those communities. I think, to me, that's very instructive for us to be thinking, even when we're doing something pretty overtly positive like a cap, to make sure that our planning processes, I think, are engaging with the public in different ways, and reflective of sort of the way people are living, and so that it can enhance that in ways that I think were ignored. Not that there wasn't an intention to enhance life for some segments of the population when this highway was done, but certainly we can see how so many folks who were adjacent to the project, those needs were not taken into account in any methodical or heartfelt way. And I think that that's such a lesson for those of us who are, in a position to direct these processes.
A real issue is that someday America has to give up its racism. And when that is done, all of the diversity that we have, this is the greatest nation on the face of the earth, because it's the only nation that has accepted people, regardless of their political beliefs, regardless of their religious beliefs, regardless of their economic status and colors and everything else. And yet we don't understand how valuable that is, because it's the only place on earth that has done that. And look how far we have advanced, and every group in America has contributed to the greatness of the nation. And yet we still fight racism because there's some stupid people that think color makes a difference over your intellectual capabilities. But covering 95, that's just my little idea. But the covering would be, to me, a statement of saying we are re-engaging ourselves as people and we are connecting ourselves again. And we have to start doing this because what we've done, if you look at Walnut Street on the east side, Walnut Street separates that neighborhood from downtown because Walnut Street is like a raceway in reality. And then you got I-95 over here. Then you got 2nd Street coming through the bottom part. And then you got Pennsylvania Avenue. You got all of this kind of separation of people by neighborhoods. And we gotta stop that. This is a great city and great potential. You know, we just gotta have the leadership and the will to fight forward. And I believe that I appreciate the representative and what she's doing, and the senator, what she's doing in terms of trying to work with people at their level and bring us back together again. Not that we're all gonna agree on everything, because I can be ornery about what I believe and what I don't believe.
No.
But I really have faith in the fact that we are having an ability to do things that are different and better for everybody.
Thank you for that. Yeah. And so the CAP is this big vision. It's going to be very costly. It's going to take several years. We're in the process of doing some feasibility. We've identified that it's imperative that we engage with the residents and our stakeholders along the highway in whatever is created there. We see in the chat, and also State Rep Dorsey Walker mentioned the first urban national park. Kevin Malloy has been a big advocate of that type of concept. So there's lots of great ideas out there. I just want to ask the panelists, what are some, I'm always thinking about like what can be done tomorrow and what can we do in the next few months or year or two as we're formulating that bigger vision to make improvements along I-95 and reconnect communities. So I didn't know if anyone wanted to chime in with some thoughts on that question.
I think there ought to be alternating.
Oh, lots of people. We'll start with Jim, and then we'll go to India. Okay, we'll go to India. And then
India.
Okay, India, you go.
You mean like what to physically do around it now versus like, I just think one of the biggest things right now with all these discussions is the educational piece. Like, I think this is a great opportunity for individuals to start learning and chiming in about what's to come over the years. And I can't remember who it was that hinted on it, but I think, you know, besides starting to beautify and do a lot of the things that the CAP isn't going to encompass, because I think underneath, I think along the sides, and that justification that was once used should be honored at some point, and I hope it does, in beautifying all those landscapes and making them a little bit more accessible, whereas they're not a safety piece. So I think to answer your question, I think that leading up to that major CAP, I think there needs to be some initiatives in not forgetting about that under area corridors and those landscaping areas and what can be done and how it can be funded so that the community could start doing things that are going to be inclusive, but it's also going to bring safety, because you guys mentioned the drugs, you guys mentioned the homelessness and what all of those things bring. And it really is if we can't make it safe for our community to feel like they can walk towards 95 underneath to go to a grocery store, let alone, we have to make it approachable somehow and maybe honor and find some kind of way to encompass all of that and start working on that before this CAP starts happening, because I don't know what specifically, because I almost feel that something that we need to ask the neighborhoods, what would they like to see there versus saying I would like to see this. But I think the neighborhoods that are directly impacted need to be educated on that, because words like gentrification come up, and I think there's a confusion about that. And I don't remember who it was on the panel that hinted and made some really good points about this is not to be confused with gentrification. And I think the education piece is really big. It's more of a healing process and reconnecting. So I think education and honoring that corridor and those things that are going to be underneath and rebuilding that part leading up to the big CAP is important.
Senator Lockman, would you like to respond?
Am I jumping in front of Jim?
Oh, right.
Oh, no, go ahead.
Are you sure?
Sorry about
No, you're
No,
high
well-
ranking. You're high ranking. I'm not.
That's okay. You can give a rebuttal to whatever I say. I was going to piggyback on what India had said, because I think, I think there, as I kind of said in my last comment, this is a really exciting and positive idea, I think. But I do think there is room to be cautious about, the impression of gentrification, or even understanding what that means, the possibilities of displacement. I think from my own perspective as a policymaker, and this comes from what I've heard from, some different advocates or constituents, is that, there could be unintended consequences, even of a beautiful, improvement project like this. When we look at what happened the first time, or when 95 was first put in, and the way it really became established and reinforced this very racialized divide, and then pushed so much of the non-white population to the east. And I think we probably have seen Nina or Dr. David could probably tell me more about what that looked like in terms of like property values and things like that. I have heard concerns from folks about, what impact will this have on property values? There are folks who rely on the fact that they can live very affordably to the east. And is this going to jack up property costs in a way that means that they can't live there anymore? So, I mean, I think that is a fair, forward-thinking thing to be considering. If from a policy perspective, should we be thinking about things we can do to preserve opportunities for affordable housing, to reconcile that better across the city, as opposed to concentrating people in certain places, those types of things. So for me, I think those are policy questions we should be asking ourselves, that we can get ahead of the completion of a beautiful infrastructure project.
Yeah.
Now I'm gonna let Jim go respond, since we skipped him, and then Professor David, I think you have.
I think there's all kind of ways to protect people, but I don't see gentrification is a different process than what a lot of people understand, and it's been used wrongly to say, oh, our neighborhood's changing, they're regentrifying. Well, they don't know what they're talking about, but I let dumb people talk all the time, so that doesn't matter. But I think you can protect people who own property. But look at the numbers. 65% of West Center City is rental. 65% of Hilltop is rental. 80-some% of East Side is rental. 80-some% of Northeast is rental. Unless you change the scenario, the people who already own all of these properties, if they wanted to displace everybody, there's no problem doing it, because a group of speculators could get together and that would be it. You'd have massive loss of people in a community. What we really have to do is say, how do we get to home ownership for a lot of people? How do we protect the taxing reassessment? Reassessments are not done because nobody wants to do them, even though it's going to be done recently because you guys in the state said it has to be done. But I don't think that's a problem. I really don't think if you make things better, it's better for everybody. There is no such thing as poor people don't benefit from improvement. They do. And we have to understand that, although you have to understand the difference between speculation, because that's what happened after I-95, after East Side, after all of that. Speculators bought up all these properties.
Mm-hmm.
And then they were owned absentee, and it's been our problem ever since.
I know, I don't know if Senator Lockman, you want to respond to him, just, try to get some back and forth. I know a lot of folks want
Well, no, I mean, I see the point, but I think I agree broadly with the idea that improvement should be for everyone. But I think that the response that we're getting increasingly from folks when we talk about investments in traditionally underinvested in communities is something I take seriously. I think it comes from a place of trauma, of having not been well served by policy decisions in the past. But I also think, if we do something amazing in a community and then someone can't afford to live there, then it doesn't benefit that low income person. So I do worry about that, and would like to, to me, I've highly value the diversity of our city. I think we all do. I think listening to India describe the changes that St. Paul's gone through over the years. Would hate to see us do something that actually diminishes socioeconomic diversity in the city.
But you can protect,
yeah,
you can protect people from that by legislation, really.
Exactly.
You can do tax zones, you can do all kinds of ways of protecting people from being removed because of improvement. But if you look at neighborhoods that really have improved, it does not chase out the existing people.
Yeah.
Matter of fact, people who own property, regardless of what their economics is, love to see improvement because their property value goes up with it.
Right,
which means they're not any longer having to sell their house for pittance, which is less than what they bought it for. Now they can at least get back some equity in terms of the value of the property. But anyway, I just think that we have to think about all of these things. I don't argue with you about, yes, we do have to think about it.
Right.
But I don't, everything that has happened in Wilmington, I get the phone calls. Oh, look what they're trying to chase Black folks out of the city. Well, you're a dumb idiot if you think that.
Also, it's a good thing we have our policymakers here on this call then, because they're going to be instrumental at helping with this. But I just wanted to we don't have to stay on this topic too long, but Dr. David, I was curious if in some of your research of 95 and maybe in other cities, or like if there's any or similar concerns, or if they've manifested in any way that you know of.
Yeah, so I think both Senator Lockman and Mayor Baker's points are valid, and they speak to sort of the need for comprehensive strategies around thinking about this, and not just say, oh, we're going to cap and we're going to have a park and a plaza and people are going to use it. It's going to be traditional parks and recreation planning with a green space, right? So I think what the panelists are saying is that we need a more comprehensive way of thinking about it, and that fears of displacement and property value increases and what that means for people and who's going to benefit from that are probably well-founded because of the way in which we've made policy decisions in the past, the way in which communities of color have been impacted by policy decisions in the past, and also because research shows that investing, particularly in green space in historically underinvested areas, depending on where that investment goes in terms of park location, types of amenities offered, park size, et cetera, can lead to property value increases and potentially displacement of people of color, right? So there's sort of research evidence that says that maybe we should ponder this and consider this and shine light of this and talk about it and get data when we're making those decisions. But I think, so the bottom line of this conversation is just that we need to think about this comprehensively, and whatever ends up on the cap, we're trying to mitigate sort of the spillover impacts, unintended consequences, but also think about the cap in terms of community development, right? And resilience and sustainability, and how you not just, provide green space, but how do you balance equity objectives, which is sort of clear from the panelists? How do you balance economic objectives for historically underinvested neighborhoods? And how do you balance environmental objectives? This day and age of climate change, how do we use a cap like this to promote resiliency? So how do you balance those objectives, increase connectedness? And I think what we're asking for is a more comprehensive way of thinking about this.
No, I agree with that. I think that's a wise thing to do. But I think also we can't be afraid of development because of development. And that's all I hear, like when the apartments went up on Shipley Street, oh, they're trying to remove Blacks from the city. I mean, that's nonsense. That was a parking garage. Oh, the riverfront, they're trying to remove, there was nobody there but contaminated land. What are you, all I'm saying is, if you're gonna fight against negativity, at least have the brain power to understand how to do that and what really is happening. Don't waste my time discussing nonsense.
Yes, well, I know that State Rep, you had been kind of wanting to speak earlier, and India also wanted to respond. So I don't know between the two of you. Oh, State Rep, do you want to go first, and then India has a question?
I always let my constituents go first. India first.
Okay, great.
I really one that answers this, because you guys are speaking of sustainability and like the legislations and everything else that go behind it, because I haven't dug as deep as I see all this federal and everything else, and I think it's great. But when we're speaking of sustainability, I'm just curious, because you were talking about public works, parks and rec and everything else, who is, just for my understanding, who's going to be the sustaining factor? Like, is this going to be the city of Wilmington, the county, the state? I'm just like, I'm not sure. I'm just curious, because that's going to definitely impact how our state reps work with our city reps, because one of the hardest things today within the city of Wilmington is the accessibility of resources that we have as community organizers to just pop up we don't have these parks, we don't have these amphitheaters, and it's so difficult to just pop up these things that are really going to help with all the great things that are happening in the community. So there's very little access to it, and it is always a battle. So I'm on the other end now. I'm going, my wheels are turning. I'm like, I'm concerned. I'm like, are we going to even have accessibility depending on who's managing this? So I don't know if that opened up a piece, but I was curious if, Representative or Senator, if you guys knew the answer of who's this sustaining long-term, and hopefully they will work with the community that's healing from it. That's not.
I think you got two entities.
Well, hold on, Mayor Baker. Sorry, I'm going to go to State Rep Dorsey Walker just because she was lined up. Sorry.
Oh, okay. No.
Listen, again, mayor is my constituent, so. But
you go ahead.
But first off, I love it when Mayor Baker gets going. Okay, so I'm sitting here falling out laughing because once he gets on that tangent, it's a wrap. But to answer your question, India, and it's a very important question, Senator Lockman shouted out Secretary Majeski as well as Shantae Hastings, because this would in fact be a DelDOT project.
Right.
And the maintenance, we're looking at this being an urban national park, the state would ultimately be caring for the project, for the park. Now, I'm sure that the city would work as far as parks and rec and have some role in it. There's no question that West Side Grows Together would be very much involved, but the, I guess, ownership, so to speak, as far as maintaining the park would be the state. And thank you very much for Secretary Destiny, the work that she has been doing around this project. She's been phenomenal. Now, there was a question a little earlier about what would it cost? And my question is, look at what it has already cost us as a city by putting 95 through the west side of Wilmington. When we look at, we count up the cost. We sing a song at church, I count up the cost. And was it necessary? And was it worth the cost? Absolutely not. Senator Lockman mentioned, and as well as Mayor Baker, talked about the drug activity. When we were growing up, Senator Lockman and myself, on the west side of Wilmington, I can tell you, you could play outside, your neighbors were watching over you. They would call your parents. Like if I went on Delmore Place, which is right around the corner from my house, if I went through the alleyway, Miss Dodd would call the house and say, I see her in the alleyway. It looks like they're playing tag or hide and seek, but I can't tell. And then my mother would either come out the back door or my father out the front door, and just making sure. And we weren't doing anything mischievous. I'm just being honest because I was a good kid. Okay, put it out there. But just being honest, like the community was watching over each other. And the hope with this pact is that the community will start looking after one another, that we'll get back to a place of being eco-friendly, developing economically, and developing the community. And the other part of it is there's a lot of money to be made keeping people in poverty. And that's what has happened down through the years. And I look at the comprehensive plans that were put forth by Mayor Baker when he was on city council and then became president of council and then ascended to mayor. It is absolutely amazing how some people could not get what he was saying. They didn't want to hear what they were looking at the messenger, but they weren't paying attention to the message. And the whole time he was right. I remember my dad saying, if they just listened to Jim Baker, we wouldn't be in this mess. And I was a little kid at that time. And you were on city council, you were a city councilman at that time. But just my father saying that, and I'm not saying it just because you're here, I'm saying it because it's the truth. And I was like, what is daddy talking about? as a little girl. That's what I would say. And now I know my daddy was right, Mayor Baker.
I agree with you on the state, India. It would be the state would be the primary agency in terms of dealing with this, but the city would also be responsible for moving forward on principle. I agree with the professor on the comprehensive view of looking at these problems. For example, early childhood education to me is a critical part of looking at how do you make your neighborhood or community a better place. It's education has to be part of that whole consideration. It's not just, thinking that you're going to create jobs. When we brought, just as an example, we brought AAA into the city, but the state, the county, the city, and the private sector all worked together to get that done. But once it was done, AAA put out these announcements of all these jobs that were available, that they had as vacant jobs, because a lot of people didn't want to move from Philadelphia to Wilmington. The problem there was a lot of people in the neighborhoods that we know of didn't have the skill to apply for those jobs. So even though you bring companies in and you make businesses flourish or whatever, it doesn't mean it helps the people who are living in these neighborhoods, because many of them don't have the educational background or the skill to apply and work in those particular companies. So we have to look at, you can't have 65% of your kids dropping out of school and saying you're going to be a better community.
Mm-hmm. And now, mm-hmm. I'm sorry.
I know, but I just think we have to do what the professor is talking about, is a comprehensive view as opposed to a narrow one of, oh, we're just going to make it look pretty.
I know we have to reconvene this panel, I think, for some future discussions that will get even, broader. It's very obvious how much 95 is connected to so many different other challenges and topics throughout the city. I just wanted to make sure, because we are going to move into some additional question and answers from the audience. So out there, if you all are listening and you haven't asked a question yet and you'd like to, please raise your hand or add it in the chat. We will get to it. But you did mention, I think State Rep Dorsey Walker mentioned it, and then this is actually an image from the vision that Mayor Baker presented when he was mayor, and it shows. So you'll have to remind me of what year this was exactly, but it does show 95 through Wilmington, and then this is a drawing of a potential cap with some structures as well. And it was in this book, which is someone sent me a picture of it when we were having our meeting about the vision for 95 a couple of years ago. So what year was that, Jim?
I'm not sure. We did 2 vision plans. I wanted to do it every 5 years. So I think it was 2004 and then 2009. And I had hoped the city would keep upgrading their vision plan so that people would at least begin to think about what actually the professor was talking about, looking at things differently, but looking at it in more of a comprehensive view as to how do you make things better.
Mm-hmm.
And you have to look at people as well as structures and physical things, and we need to put those two together.
Sarah, I feel like that was 2004 because that was the year I got married, and I remember seeing that rendering.
Okay. Yeah, excellent. Well, yeah, thank you for sharing. It's really great. Those renderings and images were referenced a lot when we were talking a couple years ago with the construction of 95. So it's great to have the source here too. Something I want, as a follow-up to a question I asked earlier, I just want to plant the seed through our United Neighbors effort, which many folks are part of, both listening and on the panel. We do convene with neighbors on both sides of the highway, and it kind of started with an event series to demonstrate what could be done to reconnect communities. I think, a model, a concept in community development is to pilot a project and do some of that demonstration so that we can build to that bigger vision of potentially a cap, say. So we have had events on the 6th Street Bridge, on the 7th Street Bridge, and then this year we are looking to do the 8th Street Bridge. And those events take place in October. But if folks would like to get involved, I will put my email address and website, but it's called United Neighbors, and we really are focusing on folks who live or work or worship on both sides of the highway through the city of Wilmington. So, but to plant the seed, some of the things I've heard from those residents, and I really, endeavor to listen, being a newer resident, are some of the small things that could be tackled, I think, sooner, like lights across the bridges, so for walking at night, like the accessibility, which DelDOT and the city of Wilmington have addressed recently with some of the curb cuts. A lot of folks have mentioned some of the greenery along the highway or sound, type barriers. I believe DelDOT's replacing some fencing, which will look much nicer than it does now. So there's a lot to discuss, I think, that could be happening to build up towards the bigger plan. And we're always looking for more folks to be involved. And just because I'm doing all this image, I will put up an image. Actually, I think I closed it, but I was going to say there was some landscape architecture students from the University of Delaware that actually met with us under the highway, with residents from West Center City, with some of our council people at the time. And they really, Professor Anna Wick from the University of Delaware was the lead there. And the students met with us, and then they presented to a huge group of city officials, residents, community leaders, a lot of folks here were there, and they presented some amazing ideas for just some landscape improvements that could be made along the highway and across the highway and under the highway that I would have never thought about. So, it's really important to continue to tap into some of that creativity from our residents and from our younger people too. So that's not really a question. That was my taking a little moment as a moderator to talk about some of the projects that are underway. But State Rep Walker, did you want to kind of expand on that a little? Or?
Well, I would like to just say congratulations for a job done. It's always amazing when you get together with community members from the West Side. Great things happen. But I would like to acknowledge that Representative Dorsey is with us from WSFS, who has been a huge supporter of our endeavors and also the best friend of our beloved Pastor Lottie Lee.
I think one thing you should do is to get with your council members and try to put money into the bond bill for projects that you're talking about, which would be leading up to, because most of this would be something that the city could do and not be burdening the state with more costs when you're trying to get the big project done through the state. But it could be done. I mean, you're talking, I'd go to the mayor and to the city council and just say, put in a few $1 million and
there we have it. And that's our plan.
But they can do it. I mean, the point is, I know a lot of people don't know how the system works, but if you don't go, because the planning department puts together the bond bill, the mayor endorses it or adds what he wants. City council has to fight its way in, but the point again is that there should be an idea of going and saying, we would like to see this happen. And I'm telling you, they can put the money in the bond bill, the next one that comes, because the city goes every 2 years. And a couple of $1 million in the bond bill would be nothing for the city to do.
Well, there you go.
Sarah, may I ask Mayor Baker a quick question? Mayor Baker, this money that's coming from the federal government, the COVID funds, shall we be able to use a portion of those funds for the CAP?
I'm not sure of all of the guidelines, because there are guidelines on what that money can be used for. And I don't know if they can really do it, but I would assume that if the city has projects, but I think that they're only getting like 27 million, and then they get another 27 million next year. So I think they're probably looking at their budget because they've lost tons of money over the last year.
Mayor Prizicki announced today at the team warehouse ribbon cutting that it would be 50 million.
Yeah, well, that's really not that much money from the federal government.
No.
So, and you did mention, and I just want to make sure to mention, we do have great representation on the call from many levels of government, and just wanted to mention our council people who have been very supportive of these different ideas, especially, obviously the council people who are touching 95 through the city. So I know they'd be very excited and are excited about this topic as well. So at this point, I know that Senator Lockman and others have been very furiously, I'd say, responding to questions in the chat. Make sure to look at open and answered if you're able to pull up the Q&A section. But are there any questions that have not been answered, or kind of we may want to kind of talk about out loud for the sake of the group? I'm looking now. Jared asked some really great questions in the beginning. And he said, my concern is that modern traffic solutions that appear logical, similar to when 95 were implemented, such as a roadway widenings and vehicular capacity increases, that these are causing the same types of problems of I-95, like the separations of neighborhoods and access to needed destinations like grocery stores. Do you agree that traffic is a lesser concern to pedestrian safety and ability to access needed destinations or allow for neighborhood cohesion, even if it means that traffic is considered failing by the FHWA? So it's a bit of a technical, I think it's focused on kind of transportation impacts. But does anybody want to tackle that, or if we need clarification?
I'm not sure. What's the question about pedestrians versus traffic?
Do you agree that traffic is a lesser concern to pedestrian safety? I think it's getting at.
Not really, because if you look at the study that the city did on 4th Street, one of the biggest problems there is people crossing 4th Street and getting hit by cars.
Yeah.
So that's right off of a 95 right there, but people don't use lights. They just run across to get to.
So we need more crosswalks. Right, Jim?
No, it's a problem where people need to understand. Don't do this because you're endangering your life. But I don't understand the question. I don't see pedestrians on 95. I don't.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm trying to understand some of the technical things, like the traffic being considered failing by the FHWA. I will have to admit that I need more clarity on that. But I do think pedestrian safety, we talk about putting people before cars at this point in our approach to planning. I think it is of paramount importance. I think when you talk to DelDOT today, we would say that we put, safety is an important component of any new project. And I think, it's, yes, we could tell people not to run across streets that are too busy for them to cross, but the fact of the matter is, if they live here and the resource that they're trying to access is like right there, and we see this even on like Route 13 and such, people are going to cross those roads. So we have to be mindful about what people need based on their residence and the commercial things they're trying to access, and I think plan for that and not just expect people not to run across a street rather than walk a mile out of their way to go to a bridge or something. They're not going to. They're going to take the risk and sometimes lose that risk. And I think pedestrian safety is paramount, but particularly in a dense area like the city of Wilmington, from my perspective, and I'm biased because I did not have a driver's license until I was 38 years old, but I think that really we should be a walkable place. It's a small city and we should all be able to traverse it, pretty easily on foot. And I think that makes it a better place for everyone to be. But I also didn't quite get the last segment there about traffic failure. And if that is impacting traffic flow, is it worth it? I don't know. To me, yes.
Dr. David?
Yeah, can I just piggyback onto what Senator Lockman said? I think once upon a time, we used to think of our streets as public spaces. And somewhere along the way, we've shifted in our thinking of streets, from public spaces to transportation corridors, right? So there are some interesting concepts to think about in terms of right to the city, right to the street, who has that right, and how do we fundamentally re-engineer our thinking about what streets are used for? Automobiles versus pedestrians, but that's a much broader, deeper thing to be thinking about.
Well, one of the things is, like in California, if you walk out on the street, cars have to stop. And if they don't, they get ticketed or arrested. So, I mean, there's ways of doing that. I think it doesn't have as much to do with 95 as it does for the city in general. Because if you go downtown and if you try to cross like Shipley Street at 10th or in that area, the cars are turning, they don't give you a break. So, I mean, you know, there are places in downtown, I think, in the city, you would protect pedestrians better. But I don't understand 95 as dealing with pedestrians.
Well, it's gotten us thinking a lot about, you know, transportation and traffic and how all those different pieces fit together. So I think it's his responses have been interesting. I do note too in the questions, that a lot of folks have referenced Carol Hoffecker's book on Wilmington called Corporate Capital, Wilmington in the 20th Century. I'm just a slight pivot. I just wanted to make sure to say that out loud. It has been answered in the chat, but I have not had a chance to read that book, but I believe Professor David, yeah.
And that whole book is available through the state archives, so you don't have to buy it or go to a library to get it. If you just Google it, you can get a big PDF of it, and it's a fantastic book on the history of Wilmington, but also makes great references to the political process surrounding the decision-making on the 95 alignment.
Great. And there were some additional comments about the concept of the first urban national park and a museum to openly discuss the history. David Kim mentioned building on kind of the topic of green gentrification that I think you've mentioned before, Professor David, and there's some great resources on how to focus on a comprehensive approach, including affordable housing as a preventative measure or response. So that's great in the chat as well. At this point, I don't see any open, just a Poplar Street project question. Is anyone familiar with the Poplar Street project?
No, that was the one I referenced where urban renewal, they knocked down all the houses on the east side.
Oh, gotcha. That was what it was called. Okay. Great. So that I think we have answered most questions at this time. I want to make sure folks can get to the Jazz Festival. No, but we can take more questions, or if there's something that in the group that you feel like you didn't get a chance to express, perhaps we could do a round as well. So if anyone's willing to kind of go first, as far as just closing remarks. Yeah.
India, were you waiting? Oh, you weren't.
And also Kevin Moy is mentioning there are some resources online. Facebook, not everyone's on Facebook, but there is a Vision for I-95 Facebook group. And there's some really great articles that are being shared there and discourse. So if you're able to join that, please join that Facebook group to continue the conversation. And Senator Lockman, go ahead.
Well, yeah, I'll start the closing comments. I mean, I'm thankful that we have these panels and being part of the panel tonight. I think it's such an interesting topic, and I'm very thankful to the Historical Society for providing it, because I think we have sort of rare privilege to be sitting in sort of the middle of the history of this. You know, we can look back at what's happened and the mistakes that were made and 50 years of consequences. And then we're at this point where it's like we can be planning and putting in place this brighter future. And I think 95 is just such an incredible example of that. I teach an introductory level policy course at the Associates in Arts program that UD has in downtown Wilmington. And last year we had to do it virtually, but we always take a walk from downtown through some of those neighborhoods to 95. And a lot of these young people are from the county and have never really experienced the impact of policy decisions like that on the lived experiences of folks in Wilmington or anywhere. And it really is just this incredible example of bad decision making, but of decision making that happened right in the heart of our city. And I think that's fascinating. And I'm glad that we're talking about it, and I'm glad that we're trying to fix it. And I think we have a great team of folks to do it right. So thank you all.
Thank you. I will call on State Representative Dorsey Walker, if that's okay.
That's just fine. I thank the Delaware Historical Society for this great discussion, for all of the panelists. You have been amazing this evening. I've learned so much. And Kobe, thank you for that wonderful opening statement and the statement about life, because that's really what it was. And just grateful that you have the wherewithal and the knowledge, the institutional knowledge, to share what you did this evening. We have a once in a lifetime opportunity to do it right. And I believe we have the right team to make this happen. And so with that, I'd just like to encourage everyone to dig deep into their hearts, minds, bodies, and spirits. Put everything to the side and let's all work together for a better Wilmington.
Thank you. It's like I'm going in order. Mayor Baker, former Mayor Baker, would you like to
Oh,
share something?
just thank you for this panel. It's been you've got a very good group of people. And of course, you got two of my favorite people, the senator and the rep. We've known them for a while. I won't say how long, but I remember going to the church for the representative who was trying to get me, I guess, to be religious again. But anyway, I think that it's great to have this thinking ability amongst these people who you have on this panel. And I've missed that because being a politician, sometimes you don't really get thinking people around you often.
Well, thank you very much. We're so happy to have each and every one of you all. But I will go to Professor David.
Thank you for having me be part of the discussion. I greatly enjoyed it. Our research on the 95 is ongoing. We're trying to collect as many stories of families that lived on that corridor before the corridor went away. So I would like to ask if there's anybody listening to us who maybe lived along the Adams-Jackson corridor or near vicinity, and you have stories to share, or you know others who might be willing to talk to us, please feel free to reach out to us. We want to
I can tell you one person right away,
Yes.
John Rago, the
Yes.
mayor's communications. His family lived at 3rd and right along where 95, they had to move because of that. You might want to talk to him.
I have him on my list. Thank you, Mayor.
Okay, great.
And I hope I'm not muted. Okay, no. India, would you like to share a few words?
Just want to say thank you again. I feel like I'm sitting in, just like the room of giants with like all the influence, and it really is emotional and just really heartwarming to see what this generation is capable of. But it's even more emotional, and I get emotional to see what you guys will actually do. And there's a difference when you see capable people who aren't able to do it versus people who step forward to do it. I don't think there's a person on this panel and many of the people that are watching. This is a real opportunity to connect people again, and really will hint on so many of the topics that were spoken on, whether that's the racism, gentrification, so many topics that are spoken in different groups. I really think this is going to be a meeting place to have them at one table. And I think just the fact that, like Congresswoman Lisa Rochester said, this is a once in a generation type of opportunity that, we get to be a part of. I'm really grateful that I even get to be a part of the conversation. And I'm more excited, not necessarily to have to sit on the table, but be able to be given the opportunity to bring back that feedback from the youth, from the free citizens, from the homeless veterans, and all the people that are going to continue to be impacted by it. So it's just really scaling. So thank you.
Thank you. And thank you for your willingness to share, all of you. I appreciate, I've had a lot of fun tonight and learned a lot from each of you. So thank you very much to the Delaware Historical Society, to each and one of you. The conversation doesn't stop here. There's been many ways throughout the evening that we've identified where folks can get involved and stay involved. There is some legislation, the Reconnecting Communities Act, that's working its way, I believe, through Congress, or may have already passed, but there may be some funding available to help with some of our planning projects. So stay tuned. And as I am ending a few minutes early, but I almost want to draw on this slide from the part one, the timeline. Obviously, we talked a lot about the construction of 95 and its impacts, and let's add a new date down here for some of the work that we're hoping to do, you know, in the future with 95 as far as, you know, a potential cap. So a little bit cheesy way to end, but I just really appreciated part one, images and information and how it connects to this conversation today. So we can stick around for a few minutes if folks end up having questions, but thank you so much. And Kobe, I don't know if there's anything in closing that you'd like to share.
Yes, so thank you all for such a wonderful panel and just such great discussions. And thank you to all the people who had their questions, you know, provided questions for the panelists. And just to quickly say that we do have some upcoming programs for the Delaware Historical Society. On August 11th, we do have a program called Complicated Cultural Landscapes at the Reed House. And on October 7th, there are we have the History Makers Award ceremony, which honors Dr. Velma Scalterberry White. You can learn more information on our website, which is dehistory.org. And you can find out more information on our programming there. So thank you all so much for this time. And also, this program is being recorded, so you will be sent there will be a recording sent shortly. And also, if those who have not had a chance to fill out the survey, or if you didn't see the survey in the chat, please take a moment to, if Alex, if you could like put a link to the survey again, that would be great in the chat. So there's a survey in the chat, so just let us know what your thoughts on this panel was, and that'd be great. So thank you all for a wonderful time and a wonderful discussion.